Well, greetings, everybody, and welcome to today's event. My name is Janet Steele, and I'm the director of the Seeger Center for Asian Studies and a professor of journalism here in the School of Media and Public Affairs. As you know, the Seeger Center is really the only center of its type in the Washington, D.C. area. We host many events about Taiwan, China, and other parts of Asia. The purpose of our center is to improve the quality of research and education about Asia and to promote greater dialogue between the policy community, the academic community, the public, and students. I'm very pleased to welcome you all here today on behalf of the Seeger Center. Along with the GW Institute for Korean Studies, we have recently been named as the only National Resource Center for East Asia in the Washington, D.C. area. The NRC designation enhances our ability to engage the broader community, including students, K-12 educators, minority-serving institutions, policymakers, military veterans, journalists, and the general public on regional and global issues of importance. Our active and vibrant Taiwan program, the largest among DC area universities, is an important and special part of our National Resource Center for East Asian Studies. So we're very happy to be hosting today's program, Humanizing the Conflict Across the Taiwan Strait, Lessons from the Strait Talk. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Liana Chen, the director of the Taiwan Education and Research Program, who will introduce today's programs and speakers. Dr. Chen is Associate Professor of Chinese Language and Literature. Her teaching and research focus on Chinese drama and theater, Chinese literature of the Ming and Qing dynasties, and Taiwanese theater, literature, and film. Liana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Janet. My name is Liana Chen. I am co-director of the Taiwan Education and Research Program at the GW at the George Washington University. My co-director, Alex Jubin, couldn't make it to here today, but it is our greatest pleasure to welcome everyone for your participation in today's event. So I want to talk a little bit about the Taiwan Education and Research Program, or as we call it, TERP. TERP was established in 2004 by Professor Edward McCord to promote and support academic and policy-related research and study on Taiwan. TERP in the recent years has supported the creation of the Taiwan Resource Center at GW's Gelman Library. And TERP has also sponsored policy workshops on Taiwan affairs, humanities lecture series, curriculum development, and student fellowship programs. On behalf of all the TERP members, we want to extend our warmest welcome to the members of the Strait Talk board and the delegates who will be sharing their experiences and expertise with us today. And we are very much looking forward to the Strait Talk Conflict Engagement Workshop, which will be taking place at GW in the spring semester of 2024. And now I would like to introduce our moderator, Professor Da-Qing Yang. Professor Yang is a native of China. He graduated from Nanjing University and received his PhD from Harvard University. He specializes in the history of modern Japan. His research interests include the Japanese Empire, technological developments in modern Japan, and the legacies of World War II in East Asia. Professor Yang is a founding co-director of the Memory and Reconciliation in the Asia Pacific program based in the Seeger Center. He's currently working on a project called Difficult Dialogue over history in Asia and Europe. And Professor Yang is the author of Technology of Empire, Telecommunications, and Japanese Expansion in Asia, 1883 to 1945. He co-edited a lot of important books, and one of them is Toward a History Beyond Borders, Contentious Issues in Sino-Japanese Relations, which was also published in China and Japan. So Professor Yang will introduce the speakers today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Chen, for your kind introduction. So I would I have the great honor to first welcome you and also to introduce our speakers and then moderate the discussion. I'm particularly pleased to welcome and introduce my old friend, Tatsu. His full name is Tatsushi Arai. Dr. Arai is currently Associate Professor at Kent State University School of Peace and Conflict Studies. He's a peace researcher and conflict resolution practitioner of over 25 years of international experience. He has led or co-led conflict resolution initiatives in over 20 countries across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, as well as in the United States. Before joining Kent State in 2019, he has served as a United Nations Senior Mediation Advisor, as a endowed visiting chair practice of post-conflict diplomacy at Seton Hall University. He was also a professor of peace building and conflict transformation at the School of International Training Graduate Institute in Vermont. He received his PhD from George Mason University's Carter School of Peace and Conflict Resolution in 2005. And he also received his Distinguished Alumnus Award in 2015. We had worked previously together on a China-Japan related conflict resolution workshop, but his resume is too long to read in full here. So I just want to emphasize that he's the founding interactive conflict resolution facilitator of Strait Talk. Next is Ava Shen. She covers Taiwan and Chinese foreign policy and domestic politics at the Eurasia Group. She also worked as a research assistant at the STEM Center in Washington, D.C., focusing on Chinese foreign policy in Asia and China-West Africa cooperation on maritime environmental issues. Ava received her master's degree from SAIS, Johns Hopkins, with a concentration on Chinese studies and international economics, and her bachelor's degrees from Boston University International Relations and French Studies. She's born and raised in China and speaks Mandarin, English, and French. Sitting close to me is Adrian Shifang Wu, currently a research associate at the Global Taiwan Institute and host and producer of the Taiwan Salon, the cultural policy soft power podcast. With an interesting exploring intersection of culture and policy, her research focuses on how Taiwan can strengthen international connections through nation building, cultural diplomacy, and a strong civil society. She's also a member of the UC Berkeley U.S. Taiwan Next Generation Working Group. Before joining the Global Taiwan Institute, she had graduated from Ritsumeikan University in Japan and Kyunghee University in Korea, dual master degree in international relations. She spent total 7 years living in Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan, including 3 years teaching English in Japan and Taiwan, and a year study at Waseda. I'm glad I was also affiliated with that university, so we have some connection. Her BA is in honors, with honors in East Asian Studies from McGill University in Canada. So just she had worked at the presidential precinct to help facilitate Mandela Washington Fellowship Program for the Young African Leaders. She's a Strait Talk GW alumna 23. I should add that Ava is a Strait Talk alumna and a board member. So in the next, I will turn the mic to Tats. He will give a brief introduction to Strait Talk's goal and history and methodology. And then we will have a conversation among these three speakers. So Tats, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Tatsushi, which is a tongue twister even to my Japanese parents who named me. So in an English-speaking environment, I go by Tats. I was given this title of the founding facilitator of Strait Talk, the title I never imagined bearing. But today, I just want to briefly summarize what Strait Talk is, what it aims to do, how it emerged, how it evolved, what I see as significance of Strait Talk. Strait Talk is a non-partisan dialogue movement that seeks to create conditions in which a long-term resolution and transformation of the conflict across the Taiwan Strait become more possible. We do so by raising the next generation of peacemakers across the Taiwan Strait through a concrete lived experience of heart-to-heart dialogue. So in the special language of people like us doing peace building, we call this track 2 or track 3 process. Track 1 being government to government. So we are not policy making entity. We mobilize civil society, hoping to have influence not only for track 1, but also to the grassroots level. And what we do succinctly is that each year, in each one of the 6 locations, we bring together 5 civil society delegates from Taiwan, from mainland China, and the United States. And we spend 20 hours of something called interactive conflict resolution dialogue in a closed-door setting. And I put 40 because we used to spend the whole week doing this dialogue. We produce a report. Previously, we produced a consensus document that comes out of a very intense conflict analysis and resolution effort among the 15 delegates. And yes, we have 100% of success rate in generating 5 to 10 page consensus document at the end of the week-long process. Then we build an alumni network, which now numbers 1,000. How did Strait Talk start? It was a vision of an undergraduate student, 19-year-old, Johnny Lin, who in 2005 saw a tense relationship across the Taiwan Strait. All forms of official communication got terminated. He decided that if the government authorities cannot talk, he would like to demonstrate young emerging leaders can sit down, talk about not just Chinese dumplings, but the real issue. And not only that, come up with proposals about how to overcome the underlying roots of the conflict. Audacious idea coming from a 19-year-old undergraduate student. But he stuck with it, mobilized the fellow students at Brown University, and he and I met, as you see. And from there, long story short, we had a first closed-door meeting. It was tense. But now, to the extent I'm standing here in front of you in 2023, Brown Dialogue started in 2005, annual dialogues continuing. We, thanks to the GW colleagues, opened a GW chapter in 2021. University of Alberta, Canada opened a new chapter this year. Taipei chapter started in 2012. University of California, Berkeley ran sessions for 10 years. So, and then Hong Kong University also began, University in Hong Kong also became the venue for annual dialogues for 8 years. So when we started at Brown University in 2005, we never imagined that there would be a second year of dialogue. It's very difficult even to have one dialogue. But effectively, we became a multinational movement that generated 1,000 alumni and a number of facilitators from both sides of the Taiwan Strait. I am very proud of being with this movement. Alumni work in many different contexts, such as government and public sector. We count about 30 alumni either in the diplomacy space or think tank space in Washington, D.C. Private sector, academia, research, nonprofit, media. Many of them went to graduate schools or PhDs, and so on and so forth. Why do I think Strait Talk is important? After all, The macro political context, strategic context has never changed. Why bother? I think that as you will see today, even if we are unable to touch the macro political context, the value and quality and depth of dialogue that is humanizing has the potential to make so many emerging leaders aware that the military confrontation will never be a solution to this. There is a potential, if not actuality, that this kind of humanizing movement will spread that goes beyond the traditional notion of win and lose. So humanization is one proposition we work so hard over 20 years to present. Now, I need to rely on other people to take this message, and that is the reason why we are holding the seminar today. So from here, I'm going to just hand it over to Chin.
Tad, thank you very much for that succinct introduction. So now we're going to move to the next phase. First, we will have these two former participants to share their experience with Strait Talk, and then they will have a conversation with Tad. So Ava, may I ask you to initiate?
Okay, so with your permission, in fact, as you see in the picture, this is one of the Asian chapters in the dialogue. So we're gonna just do a quick demonstration of this dialogue because we have somebody from China, somebody who's much closer to Taiwan, and they will be speaking. I'm not the ones who are speaking, but we have a series of questions and they will be responding to them in a very open, flexible way, with your permission. Okay, so the first question we want each one of you to address is, how do you describe your personal and professional background, as well as how you view yourself in terms of your social identity?
I can start. So I was born and raised in Zhengzhou, Henan province in China, and I first came to the U.S. to pursue my high school and university education when I was 15. And because of my upbringing, I've always been interested in, different historical perspectives from people who are living in different countries. So there's this one distinct memory that I have from high school, one of the first history classes that I had in my U.S. high school, and we were talking about the Korean War. And what I learned about the Korean War in my Chinese middle school was that it was a victory from the Chinese perspective. But what my U.S. history teacher said was that it was, in fact, a draw. And so that really piqued my interest in how different governments in different countries can view a single same piece of history event differently. And I kind of pursued that interest also throughout my my bachelor's degree at Boston University, and that led me to go to Taiwan for the first time by myself, where I interviewed Taiwanese history teachers and how they teach history to Taiwanese students, in middle and high schools, and how that differs from my own experience. And so I think if you start from here and then you compare that to Strait Talk, I think is kind of like a straight line, And so when I first heard about Strait Talk, I was like, this is so interesting. I would love to participate in that because I want to hear about, different stories of different individuals coming from different places. And for me, as someone who grew up in the Chinese mainland, I don't really have a full understanding of what is it like to grow up in Taiwan. And so that was honestly my goal in terms of, wanting to participate in Strait Talk. And my identity as, a Chinese national living in the US for a period of time now, I think I've been taking on this mission of trying to facilitate different types of communications between people who might have, at first glance, seemingly very different views.
Okay. It was actually very interesting to hear your perspective of how you became interested in culture, because I mean, my own studies have also been very focused on culture. I'm interested in soft power, cultural diplomacy. So I have been also very interested in this transnational, transcultural type of studies. And it was interesting to hear a story about how different countries view different wars, because I actually had a very similar experience when I moved to Canada, but about the War of 1812. So it happens with other countries too. But for my own background, so I'm Taiwanese American, and I was born in the U.S. My mother is American and my dad is Taiwanese, and that really influenced a lot of the way that I grew up. So I was very disconnected from Taiwanese culture. So on the one hand, you know, I've learned about Taiwan, and but everything that I've learned about Taiwan has been through my family. So it's a very particular viewpoint that I've gotten about Taiwan. So in some sense, I'm very disconnected from Taiwanese culture, being a Taiwanese American that's grown up in North America. And I also can't speak Chinese very well, but also I have a very intense feeling of what being Taiwanese is, just filtered through my family. And my grandparents, they were in Taiwan since before the Japanese occupation. So they also have a very particular background of what being Taiwanese means to them. And, you know, like I remember when I was a kid, there was one time where I heard that my cousin had said that we were Chinese, and my grandparents got very angry, and my dad cautioned me, never say that we're Chinese. We're not Chinese, we're Taiwanese. And to me, I didn't even understand what the geopolitical context was. I didn't understand why I should say that we're Taiwanese versus Chinese. People would ask me, what is the difference? And I honestly didn't know at that time. So it's kind of learning the emotions before actually learning the logic. You know, you know that you should do this or act a certain way without first knowing, well, why? What does this mean? Why are people saying that? So I think that that kind of contrast and dichotomy of not really understanding Taiwan, but really wanting to, has kind of informed a lot of my interest in culture. I studied in Japan for a while because I was also very interested in Japanese culture. And when I moved to Taiwan to teach English, I just fell in love with being in Taiwan. And that's when I realized, oh, wow, this country is something that's really special. So I think that, you know, Strait Talk for me, it was a very interesting experience because I wanted to learn more about what it means to be Taiwanese from people that have been living in Taiwan, who can represent maybe Taiwan, and maybe sometimes I feel like it's a more authentic way because I feel like I can't really connect because I don't know Chinese, but also just getting a more diverse view of what Taiwan means, and also a more diverse view of China as well. So that was really the draw of Strait Talk for me.
Thank you very much. Before I ask them a second question, just for the benefit of the audience, the 20-hour period, what used to be a 40-hour period, is going to have different phases. After we do an introduction in some creative ways, such as using metaphors, we get into something called conflict analysis, which is to look at the root causes of the conflict. We tend to use a basic humanist lens to take a look at what is considered of high-stakes security or political issues. Then, based on some shared understanding of what we see as dilemma questions that characterize the nature of the cross-strait relations, then all the delegates, regardless of which side you come from, will become problem solvers together. Then, together with some creative stimulation, we come up with solution-oriented thinking and action plans. We build a relationship. And 3 months after the dialogue, we get together virtually and check in with each other about the actions we have taken, so that it becomes, in a sense, a momentum for each one of the delegates moving forward. So with that clearly said, can you share some highlights of your experience as a Strait Talk participant?
Yeah, so I have two sort of highlight of my experience in Strait Talk. And so just for context, I've now participated in multiple symposiums. My first one was in 2021. I was a virtual delegate because it was COVID, and even COVID couldn't stop us from, talking, so which is great. And my most recent one was the one that was held in GW earlier this year. And so throughout all of these, one of my most favorite activities that we do is called the historical timeline. And this one is where, all three delegations from mainland China, from Taiwan and the U.S., all these delegates discuss internally within their own groups to figure out 8 most important historical events that have happened that shaped the trajectory of cross-strait relations, how we got to this point today. And so after they have all figured this out, if we're doing this in an in-person setting, we actually did this exercise in this very room. So if you could kind of visualize, we actually wrote all the different events that everyone agreed upon, on big pieces of paper. And so we constructed 3 timelines according to the responses of the 3 delegations. And so the timelines are placed physically. So with that end of the room being the earliest time period to the present. And once we placed it in, the corresponding time periods, then we invite all the delegates to do a physical walkthrough as if they are experiencing all these events in real time. And what is very interesting to me is, again, how people who have received different kind of education in different countries and different places emphasize different historical events. And for example, for the mainland Chinese delegates, the 1895 Sino-Japanese War is always on their timeline because of, of the memory of national humiliation, of, the importance of nationalism and national rejuvenation, and of course, the occupation of Taiwan by Japan at that time. And whereas for the Taiwanese delegates, the shift of recognition from, the Republic of China to the People's Republic of China by the U.S., that's a pivotal moment. And, when you're walking through this physical timeline, what I felt was, the interconnectedness of these 3 players in this conflict. And that just emphasizes the importance of, why we should, keep bringing people from these places together to talk and to share experiences and to increase that mutual understanding. And so I'll hand it off to Adria next.
Okay, all right. She's having a little bit of microphone trouble. So I thought the historical timeline was also very interesting, but one of the events that really stuck with me was when we were doing our basic needs. So basically this was an exercise where we tried to look at what is the most important for us. As for example, I was a Taiwanese delegate. So as a Taiwan delegate, what is important for me to protect in a resolution of conflict? So what do I want for Taiwan? What is the most important? And we really had to boil it down to just a few things. And it was very interesting to see how emotional we were and how protective we were about these things that we felt were core parts of Taiwanese identity or Chinese identity or American identity. And when I was applying for Strait Talk, I actually applied initially to be a U.S. delegate because I'm Taiwanese American. I grew up in North America. So to me, I was really surprised at how strongly I felt about some of these core pieces of Taiwanese identity. And as I was speaking with other Taiwanese people, and we were kind of deciding on what our core things were. And for example, one of our things that we felt were really important is freedom. And another thing we thought was really important is recognition of our identity. So these are some things that we feel so strongly about. And the fact that I, even as a Taiwanese American, as someone who's second gen, felt these so strongly, it was just very surprising. And I know that there were also some Chinese American delegates that also had joined us that were in a similar situation where they had first joined as U.S. delegates, but they ended up becoming Chinese delegates when they joined the program. And they also were very surprised at how strongly they felt about some of these core tenets of identity. So to me, that was really surprising. So it was really an opportunity not just to learn about Chinese perspectives, but even about like my own perspectives as well. And I think that, so later on, we did another activity that I thought was very powerful, which was when we were sharing our personal stories. And so each of us were talking about personal stories that kind of explain why cross-strait relations are so important to us and why we feel so strongly about it. And during the course of these stories, it was so powerful. I think that all of us just felt so much fear about what could happen. And we felt so much love too for what we want to protect and how it is so important to think about the humans that are affected by this, all the individuals that are affected by political policies. There was one woman there who was talking about how her family was Chinese and had been separated between China and Taiwan, and her family was unable to go to Taiwan to meet the rest of their family members. And she was talking about how painful that was for her. And to me, that was very surprising. I felt like, from a Taiwanese perspective, you always see China as kind of this enemy that's threatening Taiwan, but to get another perspective of oh, well, this is also bringing people apart. And, the fact that people are not allowed to cross borders because it's a security issue, but then it also has these other effects. I think that was very powerful to me.
Thank you. So the final question to each one of you is the so what question. What does this Strait Talk movement mean for the broader context of cross-strait relations, implications and significance?
Yeah, so for me, I think, I'm personally aware that, right now, Strait Talk cannot, directly impact government policy. But I think the importance of Strait Talk is that if we think about the components of sustainable peace, I think a key part of that is a grassroots level engagement and the civil exchanges and the people-to-people relations. I think so that takes a long time to build. And in Strait Talk, we're doing that by affecting, an individual one at a time, and I really think that, all the delegates that, I've been, friends with or, participated in the same symposium with, we come out of the symposium with such this, kind of synergy and this sort of like newfound optimism for the world, like, hey, the world is going to be okay, and also, but then keeping in mind that we are still at the grassroots level and we ourselves have things that we can do to eventually contribute to this broader geopolitical context. And I think that is the power of Strait Talk. And if we also consider the environment that we are in, which is DC, this is the center of U.S. policymaking, and the broader U.S. policy community is here. And the reason why we really emphasize, the symposium at GW is because we have the opportunity to bring together people who are, a part of the U.S. policy community, and also people from mainland China and Taiwan to have these discussions and to be able to eventually make a difference when we can actually rise up to the track 1 level.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with that, especially in the community that we're in. I think one thing that I encounter quite a lot in the Taiwan policy community is that there's this feeling of we want to take the people that are anti-China because they're pro-Taiwan, which I think that is such a it makes me sad to think about it in that way. You know, I want us to be able to support Chinese people as well as Taiwanese people. I don't think it should be a question of you have to choose one side. So I think that definitely combating that kind of feeling of you have to pick a side is very important in terms of humanizing the conflict. I also think that there's just been so much growing isolationism of Taiwan, but also particularly of China. Recently, I was writing an article about Wave Makers, which is a Taiwan Netflix show, which you should definitely check out. It's really good. But one of the things that I was looking at was, can this show affect people in China, and can it make them more positive towards Taiwan and towards democracy? Because I study soft power, so it's related. But so when I was looking at that, I read this paper that was written in 2011, and it was called "Can the Tail Wag the Dog?" And it was about how Taiwan could potentially influence people in China to become more democratic. But what really struck me is when I was looking at the different factors that they were talking about where Taiwanese people and Chinese people could interact, a lot of them had changed so much since 2011. So one of the first things was NGOs interacting, but actually that's actually decreased quite a bit since that paper was written. There was a law that was passed in 2017 that's restricted foreign NGOs in China. So actually a lot of that community has been decreasing. Another thing they mentioned was the fact that Taiwanese entrepreneurs are in China, but that has been decreasing as well. A lot of Taiwanese business people are leaving China, especially because of economic sanctions. So this is another way in which it's been slowing down. And then the last one was about academia, but also academic exchanges have decreased quite a bit, especially since Tsai Ing-wen was elected in 2020. So just looking at all these factors and all, like how this author had put it together as a paper of hope about how Taiwanese people can interact with Chinese people, and then just looking at how it's changed, it made me appreciate Strait Talk even more, because I think it's so important to have these platforms where individuals can talk together and have a place to come together. And I mean, I think also another thing that's really amazing about Strait Talk is it's a place where you can address some of these deeper questions about identity, and it gives you a safe space to ask about some of these really hard questions about sensitive topics that you might not be able to address in a more typical policy setting.
So this concludes this particular part.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this very, very informative discussion. I've learned so much in the last 20 minutes or so. And I have so many questions, and I also have some personal reflections. Since I came from China to this country to study, it was quite a different time at university campuses. I have so many Taiwanese friends. Some of them even got together with Chinese classmates. I traveled to Taiwan a few times for research, for personal travel. And one thing, Tats, you mentioned that since this project started in 2005, at the macro political level, you said has not changed much. But in some ways, it's also changed maybe for the worse. That the tension, of course, to some extent, it depends on who is in charge of the government in Taipei or in Beijing. So given this long history of over close to 20 years of this dialogue, which, of course, as you emphasize, is also a movement, is a network, which I think is extremely important. But overseeing almost 20 years of Strait Talk, what are your reflections? There are up and downs in political, economic relations. What are some of the accumulative wisdom you have gained from this experience? And also, I have a follow-up question. I mean, given your background of having mediated conflict over such a long period of time in different continents, do you see any similar difficult dialogue that can give you some ideas, hope of moving this Strait Talk forward in a more constructive way?
Okay, I took notes, and with your permission, there's a little bit of a research presentation I want to do, which begins to answer your first question, which is a takeaway, cumulative takeaway. And the second question, I wrote it, so I'm going to just come back to it later, if you give your permission. Okay. So Dachin asked quite wisely, what would be the cumulative lessons? One cumulative set of cumulative lessons is actually peer-reviewed research publications in English, Chinese, and Japanese coming out of Strait Talk. And I want to just highlight one, which is actually linked to the publicity for that event. I'm going to go through very quickly the material. In case you want to just catch up with the details, you can catch up using that publication. So the title of what I want to share with you is Engaging Conflict History and Memory Across the Taiwan Strait, a longitudinal analysis of the conflict timelines from the interactive conflict resolution dialogues. Ava mentioned that we do something called walk through history. This is what it looks like. We ritualistically, in silence, walk through the space between different histories unfolding. I, as a facilitator, personally facilitated these dialogues and implemented this exercise myself. Brown, UC Berkeley, and GW in 2021. Imagine that you take all the Taiwanese timelines and mainland Chinese timelines from over 17 years of dialogue. Have a bird's eye view of those timelines. What do you find, empirically speaking? I never thought that way in 2005, but in 2006, 2007, yes. Then I kept collecting all the data. So now I'm going to be speaking just a little bit about, as a researcher, and pose questions like, how can conflict parties, intermediary policymakers, and researchers make sense of social memories of historical conflict? This research is not about history per se. It's about how history is remembered. And sub-questions include, are there observable patterns and structures in the social memories of conflict? If yes, what do they look like? How do social memories of conflict change or remain unchanged over the years? And to answer these questions, I need to tell you just a tiny bit about the methodology. That includes delegate selection, which affects quote-unquote sampling. Then the method used to analyze the data, the basic findings, then implications of the findings. So the delegates are selected from this age pool, 18 to 35. Requirements for being selected include demonstrated commitment to cross-strait relations, knowledge of the issue, leadership potential or experience, English in North America and Mandarin in Asia, and openness to dialogue. And we take care of, we pay attention to diversity of each one of the three delegations with respect to areas of interest, regions of origin, political affiliations, blue, green, etc., ethnic community affiliation. And we issue a publicity to elicit applications, send that publicity to universities, alumni recruiters, websites, and also through personal connections. And selection is based upon essays and Zoom interviews. So if we do this year after year, and then we select 5 people from each national team. So you remember that each year, the delegates spend half an hour or 1 hour selecting 8 events, each one of 3 teams, without any knowledge of how in the previous years, in the future years, the delegates select the timelines. So this is to say, metaphorically speaking, you have an eye looking back at history. Then from 2009, looking back at history, as if to take a snapshot each year. Yeah, so the data is a result of these snapshots, independent of each other. And once we collect all the data, we do a context analysis of comparative timelines developed over a 17-year period. And the units of analysis are 20 pairs, mainland Chinese and Taiwanese. Therefore, 40 timelines, 40 multiplied by 8 events, that is 320. This is the data set. Then we analyze the data by comparing and contrasting to find, for example, conspicuous commonalities and differences, clear trends with respect to continuity and change within each society, between societies, and between events. And we have many validity issues. For example, Dachin as a professional historian can tell us that history is continuous. It is not chopped into pieces. So this exercise, in a sense, invites delegates to pick years and events which are very discrete. Therefore, when we actually, as you can kindly read the publication, we try to contextualize the meaning of the events in a narrative so that decontextualization is lessened. Okay, so what do those timelines look like? They are US timelines, but I excluded them just for cross-strait focus. This is a 2005 timeline I reproduced here. Look at how mainland Chinese delegation started their timeline, 221 BC. Qin Dynasty united China. I do remember Taiwanese delegates staring at the piece of paper. And what the hell is going on? Look. Whereas the Taiwanese side started their history with 1947, February 28th incident. I don't get into all the details here. Suffice it to say that these are really different. But now, hold your breath, because I'm going to take you to 2018, where mainland Chinese delegation started a timeline with 1971. Where is 221 BC? And the Taiwanese delegation's timeline is even shorter, 87. And look at these keywords like demand, movement, elections, movement. The words that they use began to be different. Okay? But this delegation, like 2005, thought authentically, this is a history. This is a history. Like all the negotiating delegations think, this is a briefing. So, as a social scientist, I first took a bird's eye view of the beginning year of each timeline and the end year, and I saw the difference. So the length of Taiwanese timelines, mainland Chinese timelines, this is a little complicated, so I'm going to just show you a graph. On that, this is a Chinese timeline's length. Yeah, with the exception of some of the years that went back to pre-modern time, basically, the Chinese delegation stayed within a 90-year period to explain the most important events in cross-strait relations. The Taiwanese side, about 80 years. So the two sides agree on one thing at least. That is that the cross-strait conflict is happening within the framework of contemporary issues. Yeah. Now, let me just highlight some of the commonalities. There are many, so you're most welcome to look at the publication to get into details. But maybe the most prominent commonality between the Taiwanese and mainland Chinese side is 1949, the founding of PRC, and 2/3 of each one of the delegations across a 70-year period highlighted this to be a defining issue, defining event. And throughout all those years, each one of the two sides mentioned at least one event that belongs to somewhere between 71 to 79, the diplomatic switch. And they pick different events, but they are within the same narrative framework here. What are some of the differences? One conspicuous difference is the extent to which the Taiwanese versus mainland Chinese refer to the 1992 consensus. I suppose for this audience, I don't have to explain what this is, the loose interpretation of one China here, where Chinese side, of course, had a huge emphasis on China, 1992 consensus, sometimes the point of becoming very emotional if the Taiwanese delegation rejects that as being important. I also want to highlight that the Taiwanese timelines or events tend to converge, but the Taiwanese events didn't converge much, empirically speaking. Yeah, Taiwanese people differ. However, if I pick, for example, 1947 February 28th instant, there was a conspicuous and very higher frequency with which Taiwanese people mentioned. It's not an impressive rate, but mainland Chinese seldom pointed out 2 to 8. And when Taiwanese people mention this, in relation to cross-strait history, the mainland Chinese people will say, what is that? Why is that important? That became a focus of very important conversation, yes?
Sorry to play the bad cop here. We do have a limit on our time, and we want to leave time for questions from the audience. So can I maybe ask you to summarize? Your discussion is extremely interesting, especially I'm also studying the dialogue over difficult history, so it's directly relevant. So my question is, how does this relate to the conflict resolution in the Taiwan Strait?
Then I'm going to just conclude because you need lots of time. First of all, to answer that question, social memory is intersubjective. It is never objective. So an awareness of the structures of memory is quite important. And memory can emerge and get submerged. Remembering and forgetting is a social function. Therefore, for conflict resolution, we should be mindful, smart enough to know that those frames of memory shift rather than being static. Realities change. So the diplomats and negotiators who come, who carry goals, those goals are functions of the memories, but they shift, empirically speaking. Know that. And also be empathetic with different ways of remembering. And finally, if these things shift in an intersubjective way, can we proactively and creatively shape instruments of memory? That's where there's a bit of implication for conflict resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As we know, the understanding of history is directly related to the identity formation. So that leads me to ask Adrian this question. You talked about your Taiwanese American identity and then your Taiwanese identity. And you also mentioned there are mainland Chinese students who have a similar kind of trajectory moving from Chinese American to Chinese. That seemed to imply that identities are actually fluid. On the other hand, when you talk about Taiwanese and Chinese, they seem to be rather, for lack of a better word, zero-sum. You cannot overlap. If I remember correctly, certain opinion polls in Taiwan ask question, are you Taiwanese, are you Chinese, are you both Taiwanese and Chinese? There are still people, maybe a dwindling number. I think that we have to take, the generation change into consideration, that consider themselves to be both Chinese and Taiwanese. So, from the discussion of history, this timeline, if I can ask you to reflect on this question, that would be great.
Yeah, I definitely think that identity is fluid. I actually took some conflict resolution classes in grad school from a colleague of Tat's. But one thing that we learned a lot about is the effect that threat can have on identity and how identities that are under threat become more salient and more important. So I definitely think the fact that Taiwanese identity is put under threat makes people a lot more protective of it and a lot more willing to defend it and to go to bat for it. So I think that there's that aspect of the threat component, the fact that people feel like they have to pick and that their Taiwanese identity is maybe less legitimate if they want to pick Chinese identity as well. I think that definitely influences identity. For me personally, as I've said before, my family is we are Taiwanese, we are not Chinese. So I've never felt like I'm Chinese at all. To me, it's always been a very clear distinction. So I think that in Taiwan, you definitely have people that are on all aspects of the spectrum. So.
Yeah, that's I think a very important insight. You know, if you look at the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that really was the biggest nation building moment of Ukrainian identity, whereas up to that point, many people in Ukraine actually felt both Ukrainian and Russian. So I think this point that when an identity or this ambivalent identity is under external threat, it tend to kind of become more solidified. And just one last point, you mentioned popular culture, and I grew up at a time in China where the 校园歌曲, the campus songs, popular songs were very influential for my generation. So I hope your endeavor with soft power can be successful in China, which I think goes back to Tad's point about your project is for next generation. I think this is a really, really significant. It's over a long-term project, especially in Washington, we're so often used to hearing about war games and geostrategic calculations. What is missing is actually what you said is the humanizing the conflict. Again, if you turn on the television, we see what carnage conflict can produce right in front of our eyes. So again, I want to commend all of you for this great effort. And we have some time for Q&A from all of you. So if you could identify yourself and keep your questions succinct, we'll collect a few questions. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Zoe Weaver-Lee. I'm with the East-West Center and a former participant of Strait Talk that I very much enjoyed. I had a quick question about one of the main challenges that I had going into Strait Talk, mainly because of my, policy institution background, was leaning on policy every time we had to confront the conflict, right? Whenever there was a question about how would you as a US citizen feel if there was a conflict, and immediately being like, well, the United States has a policy of one, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's not the question, right? Is how you as a citizen, as a person would feel about this conflict. Overcoming this challenge, I'd like, just any of your perspectives on the panel, what it would be like to overcome this challenge for everyday Americans who do not have a strong opinion on the cross-strait conflict, who need maybe some sort of policy to guide their decision-making. What would you say to them in terms of humanizing this conflict for them?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Zoe, for your question. I think that is why we do the basic human needs exercise that we do in Strait Talk. I think for us who come from a sort of policy research background, it is actually very difficult for us to jump out of the lens of the interest of a national government, the interest of a particular political party, et cetera. And when we're talking about, average everyday Americans or Chinese people or Taiwanese people, I think the lens of basic human needs actually is very easy, because what we ask is just one question: is what are the things that you need to protect your physiological and mental well-being, without which you cannot live or sustain your life in a comfortable way. And so that actually makes the question very I think that makes the answer very easy, because everyone needs food, everyone needs to feel safe, and be free from the threat of violence and conflict and things like that. And when you boil it down to that kind of level, I think you can actually find a lot of commonalities between, you know, Chinese and Taiwanese, Chinese and American, American and Taiwanese, right? So that is a different angle that we try to promote in terms of conflict analysis, which we think is very much missing in the DC policy environment, and also, you know, in Beijing and Taipei as well.
I think the gentleman here.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I'm Tomas, a recent graduate, and kind of one of my main questions is, you know, with this rise of kind of conflict across the globe, we've seen a rise in patriotism. And so I was kind of curious, is there, you know, I feel there's two different forms of patriotism, kind of the traditional, you know, rah-rah, you know, may have more hawkish positions, and civic, which is more, you know, dedication to civic society and kind of building a healthy nation state. So I was wondering how that could work kind of intersects with what you guys do, and how do you think is best to kind of foster that healthy sense of civic patriotism?
Difficult.
So if we define patriotism as love of one's nation, it is an expression of identity, also a need for bonding. In other words, patriotism is a frame, label, amalgamation of different elements that culminate in what we see as patriotism. But as I ever mentioned, if we peel the surface of that onion called patriotism, go deeper into the inner layers, we find the basic humanist challenge in terms of how to meet one's identity need, bonding need. Then the next question is, what would it look like when those needs are deprived? Tell me the circumstances in which those needs are met. If you're going to find them in your own society, can you look around to see if there are any societies that actually meet those needs? So I'm kind of circling back to the second question that Jin asked. And that's exactly the question I asked the Hamas leaders. And I was working in Israel, Palestine from 2007 to 2008-9, and I did bring up Taiwan Strait, which is not the solution. But I said that it is possible that despite complete lack of consensus of any kind, at least no shooting takes place. And we had a heated conversation with the Hamas leader. And I just bring this up because, you know, of course, pointing out Israel Palestine is an anti-example of a success. But if we fail to humanize cross-strait relations, if we stay at the surface of geostrategic calculation across the Taiwan Strait, away from basic human needs, we could inch toward a version of what we are seeing in Israel Palestine because of the intractability, the depth of history. This is not a warning, but this is to say that we have to cultivate awareness. So what appears to be impossible as a hurdle to overcome is more possible when we have a realistic, educated understanding of what could come in the context of ignorance, negligence of it. Can we imagine that the governing authorities have massive policy support for 1,000 Taiwanese mainland Chinese dialogues from Beijing to Shanghai, Taipei to Kaohsiung, throughout, regardless of the policy conclusion, storytelling, basic human needs, 1,000 each to start with. That's a huge, that's a small expenditure compared to military expenditure. So I just jump from patriotism, but just use a method of straight talk and sharing with you a glimpse of how we do a dialogue.
Before I take the next question, I just want to follow up. Is there a plan to set up a host in mainland China?
If you could organize one, we have been hoping that somebody would emerge to make it happen, and we open arms.
So you all heard that. Yes, the gentleman in the back. In the area, just hold on for the mic. And could you please also introduce yourself?
Yeah, Edward Chestnut, School of Engineering alumni, graduate. generative AI, as you know, is a new phenomenon that's going across the globe. Are you using any of that technology as far as understanding of conflict analysis?
Okay, maybe I should take that one. Because I'm actually now doing research on AI, bioengineering, and other technologies relative to peace building. And in fact, in our latest Strait Talk dialogue at Brown University, we did introduce something called global challenges and cross-strait relations. One of the global challenges is the AI. So I asked all the delegates, let's brainstorm with each other. What do you think will be the impact of AI cross-strait relations? Can we foresee any seismic changes with respect to employment, disinformation, misinformation challenges, among other things? And the optimistic side of the estimate that came from some of the delegates is, can AI become a moderator and mediator on cross-strait relations? But I think the overwhelming number of the delegates said that unemployment, jobs taken by AI could create a different kind of infrastructure for socioeconomic relations, with the possibility of migration across the Taiwan Strait one way or the other. Do we have the preparedness for that? Perhaps not. And this political attention stands in the way of talking about those real challenges, which is another reason why I think we need to open up a humanizing dialogue about the political challenges so that climate change, AI, bioengineering, changing structures in demographics, the aging structure, and so on and so forth, can be dealt with greater reason and resource commitment.
Thank you very much for that very timely answer. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, please. Hong Chao.
Hi, my name is Hong Chao. I'm a first-year graduate student in history. I'm just wondering if, just the question for the two past participants, can you give some examples of specific realization that occurred to you during the Strait Talk, especially with the more pressed and complicated relations between mainland China and Taiwan? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think for me, going into the symposium, as a Chinese national who was, educated in China up until the middle school level, Chinese nationalism is such, a big thing that is, everywhere in our education. And, I was conscious of that element in my background going into it. But what surprised me also was just, in Taiwanese education, I think now there's also this very potent element of, a Taiwanese identity, because it is, reasonable for, people living in Taiwan to get to know the land that they're living on better, rather than trying to, learn all the rivers and mountains in mainland China when, they've never been there. And so I think for me, it was, a realization that, the Taiwanese experience is something that should be acknowledged, and that's something it's not really talked about in mainland China. I think in mainland China, when you refer to Taiwan is sort of this abstract entity that is an island, and you don't really think about the individual people that are there. And I think through the dialogue, I kind of realized, when we talk about Taiwan in mainland China, it's kind of you don't really think about Taiwan that much on a daily basis when you're going about your life in China, because it is kind of far away, from where I'm from. I'm from Henan, which is in the middle of the country. I don't really care, right? So I think it's I think the dialogue really, humanized Taiwanese people for me, and especially in the personal storytelling component, and how people, talk about how their grandparents moved from mainland China, but then how they grew up in Taiwan. That's really shaped their perspective of Taiwan and of mainland China. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, so from my experience, I was talking before about the the basic human needs, and how I thought it was really interesting to see which human needs that we thought were really important. And from a Taiwan perspective, we felt like freedom to choose our leaders, freedom. This was very important concept. But it was very interesting for me to see that the Chinese delegates put security and safety as kind of a stronger component. And it was very interesting to hear their perspectives of why they felt like Taiwan should be part of China. I mean, from a Taiwanese perspective, it's kind of like, why are you so obsessed with us? Just leave us alone. It's this feeling of like, I don't understand why. I mean, like you were saying, you don't really think about Taiwan on a daily basis. So there's this feeling of like, why are we so important to you? I don't get it. But as we did Strait Talk and hearing their feelings about it, it was really interesting because I felt like a lot of their feelings really came from love. Like it was like, we want to take care of you. We want to protect you. And maybe I don't agree with, how it would be done. But for me, it came from such a positive place. And to me, that was very surprising, that it was kind of this feeling of like, we have this shared history and we want to take care of you. And it was from a very loving place. So to me, I thought that was a very interesting realization.
We have time for one or two more questions. Yes.
Yeah, hi. This is Tina Chong with Voice of America's China branch. This conversation is very helpful in terms of bridging the cross-strait differences. But I'd like to bring it to a more current situation, which is the upcoming election in Taiwan, the presidential election and legislative elections. Do you all of you see any opportunities in terms of, if you're going to humanize the conflict and try to find a resolution, do you see any opportunities that something can be done to improve the relationship, from Taiwan and between Taiwan and China? Thank you.
I think, it's hard for me to comment on the elections. I'm not going to vote in the elections. I don't have Taiwanese citizenship. I think it has been interesting though to see how the elections have developed. From what I've noticed, it seems like a lot of the candidates are kind of, they feel like cross-strait relations have already been like the majority of Taiwanese people believe in Taiwan as being separate. I mean, of course, they want to keep the status quo as well, but I don't think that being very pro-China is a very popular position in Taiwan right now. And I think that has kind of been taken by most of the candidates. I mean, I'm not an election expert, so so I do think that it has been interesting that has kind of started to solidify in Taiwan. And it does kind of make me hope that maybe if this position is solidifying, then maybe they'll be able to find some ways to reach out, to find some ways of interacting with people in China on a more human level, on a more grassroots level, rather than feeling like it's such a threat. I think that a lot of times, from a Taiwan perspective, of course, you worry about Chinese people coming into Taiwan from a security issue standpoint. And I'm hoping that maybe if there's sort of a consensus in Taiwan that yes, that is important, then they can also move beyond that and open it up to more grassroots dialogue and not feel so protective of the fact that they first have to make sure that everybody knows it's a security issue. That makes sense.
All right. Well, on that note, I want to thank all the panelists for their very insightful comments and experience. And I also want to thank all of you for your good questions, your patience. And I hope this is how should I say, not the beginning, but another continuation of this very important long-term project. And I'm very happy that the George Washington University, the Seeger Center, is playing a small part in this very important endeavor. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.